Hi everyone. Welcome to another 7-minute software video. Today we're going to look at manipulating pixels with Photoshop. Recall that raster images are just grids of pixels, and so to manipulate pixels, you really have to be thinking about manipulating that grid. There are also a lot of different ways to manipulate pixels. Maybe you're interested in digital painting, maybe you're interested in image editing or image manipulation. Today we're just going to cover some of the key concepts, but if you're interested in something like image manipulation or collaging or digital painting, there are a lot of other videos out there. In this video, we're going to cover painting and erasing pixels. We're going to cover working with layers and layer masks, and procedurally manipulating pixels using filters and adjustments. These should cover the basics of pixel manipulation. So let's get started. So I'm going to open up Photoshop, and I'm going to create a new file. And remember that our canvas when we're working with raster images is in pixels. So I'm just going to set a canvas to be 2000 by 2000 pixels, and make sure that the background is transparent. There are a lot of different ways that you can put pixels on the screen. The easiest is probably to use the brush. So if you click the brush tool and you pick a color like blue, you can start painting blue. But we're going to be a little bit more methodical in our exploration. And I'm going to start actually by putting a shape on the canvas. Now remember, this is a raster shape, so it's not a vector shape, which means that when I zoom in, I'm going to be able to see the grid of pixels at a certain point. Now the next thing that I'm going to do is give my circle a little bit more texture. So I'm going to go back to my brush tool, and I'm going to select a dry media brush that's kind of like a charcoal brush. And I'm just going to start painting. So I'm going to make sure that this layer that I'm drawing on is activated. And I'm just going to start clicking and dragging on the canvas. And so now I've got a much more textured circle. I can keep adding different layers of texture with different brushes, for example. Now the same thing works for erasing. To erase with a custom brush, you want to go to Mode and Clear. And you want to set the opacity to be full. And you can also play with the flow feature, but I'm just going to set the flow to be 100. So painting and erasing pixels is pretty straightforward, but sometimes we might want a canvas-wide manipulation. And so instead of painting all over the entire canvas, we could use a filter to procedurally manipulate the pixels. To do this, we can go to Filter, and we can look through all of our filter options. Now the most common that you might use are blur, noise, sharpen, or even stylize. Stylize will give you some analog type of effects like oil painting or embossing. The distortion filters allow you to create a kind of global canvas-wide manipulation of your image. So let's try a ripple effect. We can zoom out to see the entire canvas and see what's going to happen. And you can see that our ripple effect has manipulated the pixels in the entire canvas and produced a kind of wavy ripple. We can now keep doing more manipulation to it using other filters. Let's give this a little bit of a twirl. That's pretty interesting. Let's keep that. So filters are also pretty straightforward. We can do one more just to see how the blur filter works. Let's add a Gaussian blur. And you'll see that a Gaussian blur averages the pixels on the grid in a certain way to produce a blur effect. Now, more often than not, when you're working with pixels, you're probably going to be manipulating existing imagery unless you're painting something from scratch. So I'm going to use an existing image and combine it with this image that I've created to produce a kind of collage. I've got this image of Jupiter that I can just drag and drop into my canvas. Now I'm going to stretch it to fill the canvas, and then I'm going to press Enter. The image that you've dropped in is now in its own layer on top of my original image. You can drag and drop these layers to change the order in which they appear. Working with layers is key to a lot of different design software. In raster software, working with layers allows you to create different blending and compositing effects. So the first thing that I'm going to do with my layers here is turn off the one that's on top. That eye lets me just make it invisible. And I'm going to right click on the layer that has the image that I dragged in, and I'm going to rasterize it. Right click and rasterize it. So I've basically baked it into the pixels on the screen. This allows me to manipulate all of the pixels in that image. A key concept to keep in mind when working with layers are layer masks. So you can create a layer mask that allows you to non-destructively edit the pixels in your layer. You can do this by selecting the layer that you want and clicking this little mask icon down here. Now you basically have two different canvases on that same layer. If you click on the white canvas over here and you draw with a dark or black brush, anything that you draw in black is going to be hidden. But notice that the original image is not affected. So if you don't like what you just did here, you can just right click and you can disable that layer mask and see the original image again. And then you can enable it. And so you can keep adding and erasing pixels to this mask and your original image will stay intact. Now, a lot of the time you might want to just draw this mask by hand. Other times you can use another layer as the mask. So let's go back to this top layer that we have up here and let's activate it again. So this swirly black void could be used as a mask for the planet image below. So first let's activate this layer by clicking on it and then go to the layer menu, layer mask, and then go to from transparency. Now this allows us to create a layer mask for this particular layer from the transparency of that original layer. Now if I want to apply that to another layer, I can just drag it onto the layer that I want to replace. So I'm just going to say yes, and now everything is black, but that's because this layer is still on top. If I turn that off, now I'll see this mask being applied to my planet layer. Now it might be a little bit tricky to see, so I'm just going to add another layer with a bright background. So now we can even get rid of that layer that we had at the very top. Now the last thing that we might want to do is adjust some of the colors in our image to really make them pop. I'm just going to add a very simple adjustments layer here, and I'm going to up the saturation. Now Photoshop has so many features that it's impossible to cover all of them even in just a few videos. The best way to get to know the software is really just to play around with all of the tools that are available and see what they do. For example, I recommend going into the Magic Wand tool and playing around with how you can select zones of similar colors. These zones of similar pixels can now be used as either stencils or as other masks to further manipulate the image. So hopefully this has been useful for you. I'll see you next time.